Kyiv, a city steeped in history, now finds itself under siege. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has escalated into a global crisis, impacting energy prices, international trade, and global security. To comprehend the gravity of the situation, we must first decipher the mind of Vladimir Putin. His actions suggest a desire to redraw the map of Europe, reassert Russian dominance, and challenge the existing world order. At the heart of Putin's strategy lies a deep-seated grievance, a yearning for a bygone era when Russia commanded vast territories. Putin's actions in Ukraine appear as calculated steps in a grand strategy to rebuild a Russian sphere of influence. Beyond territorial ambitions, Putin's strategy hinges on a crucial economic lever: energy. Russia has weaponized its energy exports to pressure Europe into abandoning its support for Ukraine. This energy warfare is a calculated gamble to weaken Europe's resolve and force a settlement favoring Russia. Putin has increasingly turned to a network of authoritarian regimes for support, forging alliances with countries that share his disdain for the West. These alliances, while opportunistic, represent a calculated effort to break out of Russia's growing international isolation. Central to Putin's strategy is the belief that he can break the will of the Ukrainian people. Despite facing a larger army, Ukrainian forces have mounted a fierce defense, inspiring admiration and support worldwide. While the conflict rages on Ukrainian soil, its tremors are felt far beyond Europe's borders. The ripple effects have reached North America, impacting energy prices, disrupting supply chains, and fueling inflation. The war has exacerbated pressures on global energy markets, leading to a sharp spike in the cost of oil and natural gas. The conflict in Ukraine presents a profound challenge to the rules-based international order. The US and Canada have a moral and strategic imperative to uphold this order and hold aggressors accountable. The war in Ukraine has underscored the enduring relevance of NATO as a bulwark against aggression. Canada and the US have committed significant aid to Ukraine, reflecting their belief in collective defense. The conflict in Ukraine is unfolding against a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. This evolving reality necessitates a more collaborative approach to global governance, leveraging the strengths of other nations. As the conflict in Ukraine rages on, the risk of escalation into a wider war remains. NATO has been carefully calibrating its response, seeking to support Ukraine without provoking a direct confrontation with Russia. Beyond the traditional battlefield, the conflict in Ukraine has spilled over into cyberspace, where an invisible war is being waged with potentially devastating consequences. Russia, with its sophisticated cyber capabilities, has a long history of using cyber attacks to advance its geopolitical interests, and the current conflict has seen a marked increase in Russian cyber activity targeting both Ukraine and its Western supporters. In the early days of the invasion, Russian hackers launched a series of disruptive cyber attacks against Ukrainian government websites and critical infrastructure, seeking to sow chaos and undermine Ukraine's ability to defend itself. These attacks have continued intermittently throughout the conflict, targeting Ukrainian energy grids, financial institutions, and communication networks. Cyber attacks have also been directed at Western countries, including Canada and the United States, in retaliation for their support of Ukraine. These attacks have primarily targeted financial institutions, energy companies, and government agencies seeking to disrupt critical infrastructure, steal sensitive information, and sow discord among Western allies. The United States has reported a 40% surge in Russian cyber attacks on its banks in 2023, highlighting the growing threat posed by Russian cyber aggression. While most of these attacks have been disruptive in nature, designed to cause temporary outages and sow panic, the potential for more destructive attacks, targeting critical infrastructure such as power grids and communication networks, remains a serious concern. As the world grapples with the immediate crisis in Ukraine, A new front in the geopolitical struggle between Russia and the West is emerging in the Arctic, a region of growing strategic importance and potential flashpoints. Climate change, with its melting ice caps and opening sea lanes, has transformed the Arctic from a remote and inaccessible region into an arena of strategic competition, with implications for global security and resource access. Russia, with its vast Arctic coastline and ambitions to become a leading Arctic power, has been aggressively asserting its presence in the region, building up its military capabilities, conducting military exercises, and staking claims to vast swathes of the Arctic seabed. These actions have raised concerns among other Arctic nations, including Canada and the United States, about Russia's intentions and its willingness to use military force to achieve its objectives. In August 2024, Russia conducted a series of military drills in the Arctic, unveiling the Poseidon torpedo, an unmanned underwater vehicle capable of carrying nuclear warheads. This weapon, with its potential to trigger tsunamis and cause widespread radioactive contamination, has been widely condemned as destabilizing and provocative, raising fears of a new arms race in the Arctic. The Arctic, with its harsh environment, limited infrastructure, and potential for miscalculation, poses unique challenges to security and stability. The increasing militarization of the region, coupled with the growing strategic competition between Russia and the West, heightens the risk of accidents, misperceptions, and unintended escalation, with potential consequences for global security. The scenarios outlined above paint a sobering picture of the risks and challenges facing North America in a world grappling with the fallout of the Ukraine conflict. The potential for escalation, the threat of cyber attacks, and the emergence of new geopolitical flashpoints underscore the need for vigilance, preparedness, and a clear-eyed assessment of the threats and opportunities presented by this evolving security environment. It is important to emphasize that none of these scenarios are inevitable. The path from crisis to conflict is not predetermined, and there is still room for diplomacy, deterrence, and de-escalation. However, wishful thinking and complacency are not viable strategies in a world where the stakes are high and the potential consequences of miscalculation are grave. North America must be prepared to navigate this complex and uncertain security landscape with a combination of strength, resolve, and wisdom. This requires bolstering its military capabilities, investing in cyber defenses, strengthening alliances, and engaging in proactive diplomacy to manage tensions, reduce risks, and prevent conflict. Above all, it requires a recognition that the world is entering a new and dangerous chapter, one where the old rules no longer apply and the stakes have never been higher. In this new era, North America can no longer afford to be a bystander. It must be prepared to lead, to deter, and to defend its interests and values in a world where the only certainty is uncertainty. The conflict in Ukraine has reverberated across the globe, eliciting a spectrum of responses from the international community, ranging from unwavering support for Ukraine to tacit acceptance of Russia's actions. This diversity of perspectives reflects the complex geopolitical landscape, the shifting alliances, and the divergent interests at play in this new era of great power competition. In Europe, the response has been largely unified, with the European Union imposing unprecedented sanctions on Russia and providing substantial military and financial aid to Ukraine. This unity, however, masks underlying tensions and anxieties within the bloc. Germany, with its historical ties to Russia and its dependence on Russian energy, has been hesitant to take more drastic measures, fearing the economic consequences for its own industries and consumers. France, under the leadership of President Emmanuel Macron, has positioned itself as a mediator, seeking to maintain dialogue with Putin while also providing military support to Ukraine. Macron's efforts to find a diplomatic solution have been met with skepticism from some quarters, who view them as appeasement of an aggressor. The debate over how best to engage with Russia, how to balance support for Ukraine with the need to prevent a wider conflict, continues to divide European capitals. Beyond Europe, the conflict in Ukraine has exposed the limits of Western influence and the growing appeal of non-alignment for countries seeking to chart an independent course in a multipolar world. India, a rising power with long-standing ties to Russia, has refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine, abstaining from United Nations resolutions criticizing Russia's actions and continuing to purchase Russian oil and weapons. This stance reflects India's strategic calculus, its desire to maintain good relations with both Russia and the West while prioritizing its own security and economic interests. India, facing a rising China on its borders, relies on Russia for military hardware and energy supplies. Alienating Russia would weaken India's strategic posture and leave it more vulnerable to Chinese pressure. This balancing act is becoming increasingly difficult for countries caught between competing poles of power. The conflict in Ukraine has forced countries to choose sides, to align themselves with one camp or the other. This pressure to choose is exacerbating existing tensions and creating new fault lines in the international system. The conflict in Ukraine has laid bare the fragility of the post-Cold War order, an order built on the assumption of Western dominance and the universality of liberal values. This order is now under strain, challenged by the rise of authoritarian powers, the resurgence of nationalism, and the erosion of trust in multilateral institutions. The war in Ukraine has accelerated these trends, deepening divisions between the West and the rest, and raising questions about the future of global governance. The inability of the United Nations Security Council to act decisively in the face of Russian aggression has highlighted the limitations of this body, paralyzed by the veto power of its permanent members. The conflict has also exposed the limitations of economic interdependence as a guarantor of peace. The assumption that interconnected economies would make war unthinkable has proven flawed. Russia's willingness to absorb economic pain, coupled with the West's reluctance to risk a direct confrontation, has emboldened other revisionist powers, who may now be tempted to test the limits of the international system. Putin's endgame remains a mystery, a puzzle with pieces scattered across the global chessboard. His ambitions, fueled by a potent blend of historical grievance and a desire to reassert Russia's dominance, have plunged the world into a period of profound uncertainty. The ramifications of his actions extend far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine, impacting energy prices, food security, and the very foundations of the international order. The world watches and waits, holding its breath as the crisis unfolds. Will Putin be content with a Pyrrhic victory in Ukraine, leaving his country isolated and economically crippled, or will he escalate further, risking a wider conflict with potentially catastrophic consequences? These questions keep policymakers and citizens alike awake at night, for the answers will determine the fate of nations and the future of global stability. The world is at a crossroads, facing a choice between appeasement and resolve, between clinging to the vestiges of a crumbling order and forging a new path forward. The decisions made in the coming weeks, months, and years will shape the world we bequeath to future generations. The stakes could not be higher. This conflict, however, is not simply about Ukraine or even Europe. It is a microcosm of the broader geopolitical shifts underway, a harbinger of a more turbulent and unpredictable future. The rise of authoritarianism, the erosion of democratic norms, and the resurgence of great power competition have created a world where the old rules no longer apply, and the threat of conflict looms larger than ever before. The conflict in Ukraine has exposed the fault lines in our interconnected world, revealing the fragility of peace and the interconnectedness of our fates. From the refugee crisis to the spike in energy prices, the consequences of this war are felt in every corner of the globe, reminding us that we are all interconnected, for better or for worse. In this new era of uncertainty, one thing is clear: isolation is not an option. The challenges we face, from climate change to pandemics to geopolitical instability, transcend national borders and require global cooperation to address effectively. The conflict in Ukraine, with all its tragedy and turmoil, should serve as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that our shared future depends on our ability to find common ground, to bridge divides, and to work together to build a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world. The time for complacency is over. The time for action is now.